I remember when I was about 8 or 9, I come from Perth City, wonderful place, and there was no drama schools at the time. There was no drama clubs. There was no drama at school or anything. But I just wanted to be an actor. I'd seen, Sean Connery and Goldfinger, and my mum had said he came from Edinburgh. And I thought, why, he's Scottish. He's up there. So I thought, this is great. And then I wanted to be an actor. And there was a programme. Some people might remember it. Ask Aspel. Of course. Remember that? Yes. And Simon Ward was on, and he had just done a film called Young Winston, and he was talking about being an actor, and I said, that's what I want to do, Mum. I want to do that. And then someone had written in saying, what advice would you give to young actors? And I was waiting to see what you'd say. And he said, don't. Just don't. It's a terrible job. It's a nightmare. And I fucking hated him ever since.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this special celebration of the life of actor Andy Gray, who sadly passed away last month. Now, before we begin, hit that share button. Let's spread the word and get as many people in here as possible. We've got a great lineup tonight. Andy's peers talking about working with Andy over the years. Now, before we begin, I'm going to say hello to a few people who are watching. Hello to Robert Ashcroft, Kieran Taylor, Graham Baird, Mags Murphy, Cameron Leroy, Lisa Bothwick, hello Liz Dixon, hello Lynn Wilson, Elaine Taylor, Taylor McClelland, hello, Bernie Hunter, hi Bernie, oh my goodness, we've got a lot of viewers already, Sharon McClelland, Rosemary McKenna, Christopher Coulter, hello, Greg Morrison, hello everybody, Michelle Laycock, thanks for tuning in, spread the word, hit that share button, and let's get as many people in as possible. Coming up on the show, as I said, we have lots of Andy's friends and peers from the business talking about working with Andy. Here's a message from Andy's naked video co-star, Helen Lederer.
I remember Andy being so friendly and so witty and so funny, and Andy and Johnny Watson took me for a drive to the Lochs, and I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. And I remember the wit, and in the room, if anything ever needed to be diffused, of course it never did, Andy would always come up with a funny line, and he was the sparkle in the room. He was someone you wanted to be with. You knew that he would have the funny line. He was warm, he was friendly, he was the person that everybody wanted to talk to, the go-to person. And how versatile Andy was, whatever character was, posh, not posh, Scottish, not Scottish, musician, resistance fighter. I just couldn't believe he was just so reliably funny. And I remember the James Bond sketch, which I was lucky enough to be with him, and the surprise sketch that Elaine, wonderful Elaine Wasilla Black, and then Andy and I went on a date, and the surprise was that we were brother and sister. But Andy played that so beautifully, very subtle, and I count myself very lucky to have known him for a short period of time. I did a really bad show at the Edinburgh Festival, I think about 15, 16 years ago, and very kindly Andy and Elaine came to see it, and we sat afterwards with a drink, and I just remember, I don't think anyone said anything, which was really kind. It was just nice to see him, and after all those years before, and yeah, a lot of kindness shown, a kind, funny, talented, huge loss.
We had done naked video, we'd done a series of that, and that had come from Naked Radio, which you do every week, and they were looking for a sketch show. The BBC London were looking for a sketch show, and they came to Scotland, and they were kind of, we'll have to go to Scotland, and of course we had one ready made. We had Naked Radio, so we did a TV version of Naked Radio, but then we did that, and then we did City Lights.
My first guest was the producer-director of the first series of City Lights, and he's also been the producer of probably most of everything you've ever watched, any comedy you've watched on BBC Scotland. And I'm delighted to welcome Colin Gilbert to the show. Colin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
That's my pleasure.
Can you remember your first meeting with Andy?
Yes. He was recommended by somebody in the Naked Radio cast, I think. It was a sort of very small part. We were doing a series called Laugh, I Nearly Paid My License Fee with Robbie Coltrane and John Sessions. And basically I got on very well with him, and he was very funny doing it. And then, you know, just sort of round about that time, there were a lot of things happening, you know. Naked Radio went into its second series, which had a completely different cast from the first series of Naked Radio. And that was basically the cast that went on to become the cast of Naked Video. And Andy was around. I mean, because we were doing Naked Radio, we were doing Naked Video, and then we were going to do City Lights. So he was sort of there all the time. And I don't remember auditioning Andy for it or even discussing it with him. It just seemed to be like an assumption that he was going to be doing it. I think he made us assume that he was going to do it, so he ended up doing it.
And what kind of relationship did you have with Andy? Did you have did it become a friendship, or was it merely a like a working relationship?
Well, it was obviously a working relationship first and foremost, but I mean, Andy was a party animal. He loved sort of going for drinks after the recordings and whatever. I remember the very first episode of Naked Video that was transmitted, Andy booked a bar in the leisure centre of the Pond Hotel, and we were all sitting there with nibbles and drinks, you know, because that was kind of the way that Andy saw it. It wasn't just a job and then you went home. It was kind of, oh, well, now we're all going to watch it going out and have a jolly good time doing it. And then over time, because you're working with somebody so much and so regularly, you know, because Naked Radio went for umpteen series. We did a live version at the Edinburgh Fringe. Naked Video did, I think it was 6 series. City Lights did 5 series, you know, so it was a lot of years working with him and all year long, because when you finish City Lights, you'd start on Naked Video, and then when you'd finish Naked Video, you'd start on City Lights. So yes, and then you start getting into the sort of more playful side of it, you know. Andy was keen on practical jokes and things like that, so we would then try and get our own back on him.
Can you single any out? Can you remember any?
I can remember getting our own back on him. I can't remember any of his practical jokes, but Andy was terrified of rats, and we had a quickie for Naked Video that we were doing that involved a have-a-go hero. And basically it started in close-up of his face, and he was talking about being a have-a-go hero, and as the camera pulled out, he was a disembodied head who had obviously been hacked to pieces by the people he was having a go at. And in this digital age, you would now be able to do that, you know, with green screen wizardry and all that kind of stuff. Well, in those days, we actually had to construct a pavement around Andy's neck, which involved him standing in a manhole while we built this. And so, of course, once he was incapable of moving, we started to postulate whether or not there might be any rats in the manhole. And we had one of the prop men had a small cuddly toy on a string that we had built into the rig, so that it then started rubbing up and down against Andy's leg, but he couldn't move. Very cruel. That would probably now constitute bullying at work. And
well,
yes,
that's absolutely hilarious. Because if it was a prankster, well, that's what happens. If you're a prankster, yeah, you've got to take the consequences.
The last time I worked with Andy on a television show, it was actually the last series of Rhapsody Nesbitt about 10 years ago, and we had an episode where Rhapsody Nesbitt was in hospital, and he was sharing a ward with a man whose penis had been cut off by his wife, played by Andy Gray. And he had annoyed the doctors, so they had, instead of attaching it to his leg to keep the blood flow through it, they had attached it to his forehead. But that was the last thing I did with Andy. He was a good-looking guy, and whatever, he loved playing kind of grotesque characters. I mean, we had a character in Naked Video who we named the Pervert, which Andy played with great relish, with his hair parted in the middle and slicked down and sort of drooling and dribbling. And he kind of reprised that in an episode of Rab C. Nesbitt, where he was playing Mary Nesbitt's boss. He was sexually harassing her. It was the episode with David Tennant, and he ends up harassing David Tennant in a cupboard because David Tennant was playing a trans woman, but he didn't realize that. And yeah, it was almost impossible to get through that day's filming because of the amount of corpsing that was going on, you know, because he was he was touching Elaine all over, because that was part of what he was meant to be doing, of course. So he was also tickling her, and you know, she couldn't get the words out because she was laughing so much. It was touch and go.
Colin, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on today and talk about Andy. Thanks, Colin Gilbert, everybody.
But I mean, the thing about then, TV was slightly different because, you know, when it started, it was just Scotland. It was on Tuesday nights, and you know, it was given time to kind of work. You know, the first few episodes, people kind of went, yeah, it's all right, it's about a bank and a guy who writes, and there's this guy Chanson and Big Tam and all that. But because it got time to kind of, you know, just, you know, get into people's houses and get into people's hearts, it worked. And then by the end of the first series, people loved it. And then they weren't sure whether they were going to do a second series, but the public wanted a second series, so it was down to the public who did it, really. And people in Scotland really loved it. It was great.
With us right now is none other than Jordan Young. Jordan and Andy worked together in Panto and became close friends. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ross. Nice to see you, mate.
Everybody that knew Andy seems to say that he was the same off stage as he was on stage. What was your introduction to Andy, and did you find that to be the case as well?
Absolutely. I think since we sadly lost him, you're not going to hear a bad word about Andy. Andy was fun personified. He was larger than life. He was an incredibly generous guy, incredibly funny guy. I've been saying to a lot of people, you know, out with all the comedy and the genius that he was incredibly intelligent as well. He was a really well-read man and a very well-thought man. Well thought, you can tell I'm not very intelligent, well-thought man. But you know, I mean, he was very, very smart, and that was, you know, and of a facade of comedy and all that was behind a very, very clever man. But my first time I ever met Andy would be 1998. I was doing a drama course in Dundee College at the time, and my mate worked in a bar, and it was a small boutique hotel in Cooper, Fife, very, very small. My mate was like, look, come up, I'll give you 3 pints, there's nobody in. And so I'm sitting getting 3 pints at the bar, just me and my mate who's a barman, and Andy Gray walks in. And of course, I'm studying to be an actor, and Andy Gray after telly walks in, and he'd been doing an after dinner speaking thing in Cooper, and that was where he was staying that night. And we ended up getting really, really drunk. And of course, and I said this to him very recently, you know, I brought up a lot, was I was so starstruck, but trying to play it cool, because I was trying to be an actor and be like, oh, you know, I'm an actor too, yeah, cool. You know, I did doing an NC in theatre arts at Dundee College. And I remember, not only was he brilliant company, the anecdotes were just coming thick and fast, he was incredibly kind with his advice and his enthusiasm. And that is something that for the next 23 years stuck with Andy, for me personally, and I'm sure everyone will say the same. His enthusiasm for you and your choices, be it life choices or career choices, he was consistently supportive, and everything was a great idea. Everyone was like, go for it. You know, we can overanalyze everything to death, and we overthink everything, all of that. But Andy was always like, brilliant, do it. Why not? Go for it. And he was a huge support to me. massive support. The first time I worked with him would be in Legit, what you're saying, which was 2006, I think. And I remember he totally stole probably the series, if not the episode. He was just a genius, you know, one of these people that whatever material you throw at him, whatever's on the page, he could bring it to life in a different way, in a much more creative, imaginative way than most. You know, and things in Panto, and this will probably be repeated by folk as well. And he could make the word banana or the word balloon hilarious. He could use it vocally and what he would do with his face and bring 1,100-1,200 people to, you know, tears with laughter. And that's something you can't learn. You can't be taught that. That's just a natural. He had funny bones, and that was a charisma and just a sheer charm. What else I worked with him? He directed me in a play, which again, that's where I was going with the intelligence. He created an amazing rehearsal room, great fun and joy, and you were dead safe to just try anything. It didn't matter if you got it wrong because he was so supportive. But see, when it come to knowing your work and knowing the text, knowing what he wanted, he was so on it. It was brilliant. And River City, worked with him for a few years in River City too. What else? And then Panto last year, or well, 2019, which was his first Panto back after he's recovering from leukemia. So that was really, really special, because that was something we'd spoke a lot about over the years, about eventually doing Panto together. But when we never really saw it coming, and then when it did happen, we were both kind of buzzing that, and it was just a sheer joy to watch him. You know, I used to stand in the wings and watch him, and watch how he was effortlessly funny. That's not to say there's no craft behind it or there's thought behind it, but he just had a charm and a charisma with the audience that as soon as he walked on, you could feel him go, oh, magic. We're just relaxed. This is going to be great. So it didn't come as any surprise to me at all how good a straight actor he was, purely because of the way he spoke about our craft, the way he spoke about our industry, his knowledge of it. He understood the machinations of it all very, very well. And that was another thing I would say about it. You got no bitterness out of him about, oh, I should have been in Hollywood, or I should have been doing this. I think he was probably very content with where he was, because Andy achieved an awful lot, you know, from Panto to doing films, to doing telly, to doing comedy, to doing theatre, to directing, to writing. You know, I'm sure we all want to do more, but I think he achieved much more than the majority of us ever will.
And I think when you pointed out there about Andy's character in Legit standing out, because he was such a big character that he played in that particular series, for me it was the same in City Lights. I think it was Chancer that attracted. At school we would always be talking about Chancer.
Yeah. I think as well, it's that effortless thing, but he was bold with his choices. You know, he wasn't scared to go big with things, or, you know, be brash or comedic, because it worked. You know, and that was, again, that's the charm thing, the charisma I'm going back to, and that's like Chancer. I remember Chancer. You know, I was, you know, very, very young back in City Light days, but not that young. He stood out. He really did. And that episode of Legit, which, you know, my mate speaks about that now. You know, my best mate talks about that episode with Andy and how it still makes him laugh. I thought it was genius, and it was kind of character that you give it to another actor, not necessarily would have worked anywhere near as good. But that was his ability.
If you could sum up Andy in a few words, how would you sum up Andy?
Genius, funny, intelligent, charismatic, and my pal.
Jordan, thanks very much for taking out the time to come.
Thank you, Ross. Cheers for that. Thank you.
I was a security guard. He was a security guard. But I was a masochist. And to make it convincing, that's right. To make it convincing, the break-in, I was in it because they were stealing a monkey, and to make it work, I had to get them to beat me up. but they would never beat me up hard enough. I was going to, come on, hit me like a man, come on. Harder, it's great fun.
I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the show next, Allan Cumming, OBE. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm pretty good, thank you. Yeah, not too shabby, still alive.
Tell us how you first met Andy. I believe it was just after you left drama school. That would have been back in, what, 1985?
Yes, thank you. So I left, the first job I had when I left drama school was Trumpets and Raspberries with Borderline Theatre Company, the Dario Fo play, and I just played a little part in it, and Andy and Elaine C. Smith were the two leads in it. So I think maybe I'd met him slightly before, but that was basically, because we did that at Edinburgh, and then we went on a big tour of Scotland. But it was my first job, and it was actually a really amazing thing to sort of, do a tour like that. I never, that idea of what that's like, but also just to work with people who are, were such, I think Andy was such a great actor. And the last time I saw him was a couple of years ago in Panto at the King's. And I realized that, to be as good a comedian and as idiosyncratic a comedian as he was, you need to be a great tragedian as well, because, there's such pathos in his humor, and like he make you feel incredibly attached and you worry for him, even though he's being funny. And I think I really remember that from looking at him, that he had this, and also just the way he used language was incredible. He would like say, he would sort of say lines in such a strange way that was just hilarious, but yet it was also still in the character. And he and Elaine were a great, double act as well, just to pair them. So it was a great thing to spend those months. I was 20 years old, just out of drama school, and to be able to sort of watch people develop and work over a period of time. But I always remember there was a bit in Trumpets and Raspberries where he had to be entirely wrapped in bandages, and Elaine, I think he was in a wheelchair, he was in bandages, and Elaine had to come on and go, "Oh, my husband," and he was just, he was the most wicked. I mean, he would say and do lines in a funny way, a different way, and also just like as a sort of an entirely bandaged person, he still was hilarious, and he would just make her laugh so much. And also, I would be, looking out front, holding the wheelchair, I remember, or pushing this thing, just absolutely. And I love, actually, he, we all love a false corpse, as they say. Sure. It becomes part of the thing, and with really clever performers, that you make the audience think that you're actually just laughing for the first time. You did initially laugh like that once, but you've then incorporated that into the sort of the music of the scene, and he was just like a genius at that. But I just remember, I don't think I've ever seen a cast lose it so much on stage as in that. And that was my first job out of drama school, so it was kind of set the pattern of me just laughing. So that was my first encounter with him. And also, he was such a great person to go out with and have a laugh with, and enjoyed a few drinks. And then I became his neighbour. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know. I knew you were originally, you were from Perthshire. You were born in Perthshire, but you moved to Carnoustie. You were brought up in Carnoustie. So where were your neighbours in Perth?
No, in Glasgow. After Trumpets and Raspberries, we were neighbours in a building in Dundonald Road. Dundonald, yeah, is it in the West End? Is it? No, yes, Dundonald Road, I think it is. Like it was an old house that was built, made into flats, and he lived there. I lived there with my girlfriend. He lived there with his girlfriend, and so yeah, I would see him on the stairs. And I remember one time we both got locked out. We both locked ourselves out drunkenly. We're both on the steps, kind of like going, "Oh dear," buzzing the door. I think we had to buzz the man who was the landlord, who lived on the top floor, to let us in. So that was not received well. And like I said, that last time I saw him at the King's, I was sitting away back upstairs, and it's that really great lesson in, a raised eyebrow, but from that distance, he's just got such a great, physicality, yes, and that incredible face. It was funny, actually, because I saw him at that time in Edinburgh, and I just, at that point, I have a place in Perthshire, and so I knew he lived in Perth, and so I was like, oh, we've got to get together. Next time I'm back and I'm around for a bit, I'll give you a ring. So we swapped numbers again, but we never got around to it, because, funnily enough, though, this is what was why, in a way, hearing about his death was so shocking was that I was in Scotland. I was in my place in Perthshire, and I was just before Christmas, so the end of 2020, and I heard on the radio on BBC Scotland him and Elaine talking about they were repeating City Lights, that sitcom that they've both been in. And so they were on the radio talking with Janice Forsyth, and they sounded in great form. And I'd known Andy had been ill and everything, but I remember thinking, oh, that's great. He sounds really good. He sounds really, happy and well. And so that was why it was even more shocking that, then I was back here in America. It was actually Forbes who called me and told me only seemingly a few weeks after that. I mean, I think that's, a sort of what I think about what is a true star, is someone who's sort of so idiosyncratic and that you think, what, they're fascinating. And I always think that stars are not necessarily people on stage. They're people, you can have a waiter who's a star, or someone, that it's anyone in any job, but there's something about them that is so unique that you're drawn to them. You want to find out more about him. And Andy was one of those people for sure.
Allan, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to come on and talk about Andy.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for including me. It's really nice.
In Scotland, certainly, Panto's very much part of our the history of our music hall and comedy anyway.
Which you're a fan of as well.
Which I'm a big fan of, yeah. So I mean, that's where it originates from in Scotland. Panto's and unlike a lot of other theatre, Panto, the great thing about Panto is it's immediate, and the audience are such a big part of it. And as an actor as well, even doing straight plays, Panto is a great learning place. It really is, because if you could do 2 shows a day and make it look as if you're enjoying yourself and real, and you can react with the audience, then you can do anything. Hamlet is a doddle after that.
My next guest is one of Andy's closest friends, and of course one of his fellow Panto stars. I'm delighted to welcome Allan Stewart. Allan, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure.
Now, there's so much I could ask you about Andy Gray. The first thing I want to just go straight in there. What was it that you noticed about Andy that was special, and when did you notice that?
Well, it's about 20 years since we started in the Kings together. And I really didn't know much about Andy. I hadn't seen him in City Lights. I just knew everyone talked about him, and everyone said he was a character. That was the one thing I knew when I met him. And he's one of those people that it's immediate. You just like him. It's likability. And I've always said likability is one of the most important things in show business. I said to another friend of mine who became very successful, that was Ross King. And as a young T-boy in Radio Clyde, he came in and I said, "You've got likability." He must have thought, what? Anyway, Andy had that in spades. You just immediately liked him. And I've seen that. And we could be sitting in a restaurant, 4 or 5 of us, and somebody would just stop to talk, and you would see women and girls just kind of like hanging on his words. He just had something special. And that is one of the things he had on stage. There's an expression that I love. You come over the footlights. I can see people that are really, really talented and really good on stage, but they don't come over the footlights. And Andy did. He walked on that stage. And that was probably one of the first things I noticed when we started working together, that we had this rapport that just worked without us trying. We didn't try to do it. Nobody said, "You and Andy are going to be doing this kind of a double act together for the next 20 years. We wouldn't have believed them. So he could do that immediately. And the other thing was he could make a line that wasn't funny, funny. And I know that from having written the Panto along with other people over the years, with Ed Curtis and Alan McHugh. There'd be a line there and I would go, "Well, it's okay, but listen, give it to Andy. he'll make it funny." And he would, just by the way he said things. Sure. Annoying. You'd say, "Don't be annoying." The line would say, "Don't be annoying." But he'd go, "Annoying. Don't be annoying." There was one line he sat with Cinderella. We used to wait for it every night. He sat after the cards had been, the tickets had been ripped up, and he went, "I blame myself." And we just waited for that. "I blame myself." And it got a laugh. Why? I don't know. It's just the way he said it.
Jordan Young was on talking about when he said bananas and balloons.
Bananas and balloon, yeah. Well, we used to find a word every year. I would write our opening sketch, and he'd come on, and I'd say, "Wonder what the word's going to be this year," because it started out with banana. When I said, "He come on with a banana," and he says, "My banana," and then he knocked it, or I knocked him, and it fell off, and he went, "You broke my banana." And then the next year it was balloon, and then last year or two years ago it was he went off and he had a crash, and he said, "I fell." So I knew when I was writing the sketches for him which word he would pick on, and he always did. I didn't have to tell him; he just went, "All right, that's my word for this year."
I know there's probably hundreds that you can choose from over the years, but can you pluck out any sort of funny stories, anecdotes, or just fond memories of being with Andy?
It's one of these situations, as you say, there's hundreds of them. And also it's in the telling of them. Again, when it happened, it was because Andy would have just said it off the top of his head, and it worked. We used to love getting the 2 o'clock in the morning message, which you'd wake up to the next day after his 3rd or 4th bottle of Prosecco. And hi, my partner, I love you. And I just wanted to say it because when you get home, there's nobody. You just want to phone your friend. You wouldn't have a clue what he was talking about, but you would roar at them, and you'd send them back to him the next day, and he'd go, "I don't remember doing that." You know, and you get these regularly 3 o'clock in the morning. We used to do right through the whole lockdown. We did a Zoom. The Panto boys, Jordan, Andy Pickering, Grant, myself, and Andy did Zoom every Thursday night. And because he had been self-isolating or shielding, which was even worse, he could do nothing for 8 months. So he wasn't even like me here with Jane and the kids and Grant and all of us having our partners. He was just there stuck in a house. So he got so excited every Thursday when it came along that he would start on the Prosecco at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So by 8:30, he would come on and we'd go, "Hi, everybody." Go, "Ha, ha, ha, my friends are." And that would be it. He wouldn't stop talking. And we'd all be looking at each other in the Zoom thing saying, yeah, we wouldn't get a word in. So we had some incredibly funny nights.
Tell us about the last job you were working on.
Well, we had been going to do the Edinburgh Panto, as we had been doing for so many years. And as we got closer to it, we realised that Edinburgh just wasn't going to open up in time for us to be able to do even a socially distanced one. So Kudos got in touch with us and said, "Do you fancy coming to Milton Keynes?" And it was going to be with Claire Sweeney and Lee Mead and a full cast. And it was lovely because Michael Harrison, who's the producer of Kudos, he had billed us on this bill. I mean, nobody in Milton Keynes has a clue who Andy or I are. And they billed us as Panto royalty. And it was great because there was everybody there, just so-and-so, and Panto royalty, Allan and Andy. And it was great because we walked down there into the rehearsal room. We had Andy Pickering, who was our own MD from Scotland. We had John Nichol, who was in the corner, who was from Scotland. We had Ed Curtis, who was a director. It was like we'd arrived like Panto royalty with our own entourage. It was just fantastic. So we had 10 days of amazing rehearsals. And when I say amazing, it was just like, we were just straight back into it. Everyone in the show was great fun. And we'd been obviously 8 months since I hadn't done a stroke for 8 months. So it felt like, well, we are working again because we were working the room. Andy and I, especially Andy, works the rehearsal room. He has people in fits. He always has had. And we had all the English people sort of roaring and laughing. So we thought, oh, might have been off work for 8 months, but we've still got it. And I would have loved to have actually got on stage, even if we'd only got 2 or 3 shows in. But the Tier 4 situation came in on the Thursday. I fell off stage and smashed my leg in. It's a lovely thing for a man to say. I got my heel caught in my underskirt and fell off the stage.
Well, they say break a leg, but
yes, that was perfect. That was a perfect example of it. So I then went home a day earlier than everybody else because I had to go to the doctor, and they all stayed and did the technical rehearsal, which I don't know why we did it, but they did it for another 2 days before they went home. And I look on it as probably being the bullet that I dodged, because I went home early. Andy and Alan McHugh stayed on, and they both got COVID.
Oh, dear.
And Alan McHugh had it quite bad, but he got over it. And poor Andy didn't.
On behalf of the nation, we offer our condolences, because we know how close yourself and Grant were to Andy. And we've got Grant coming up next. And I think everyone in Scotland, including Andy, would want you guys to carry the torch. And I hope you continue to do so.
Well, yeah, it's going to be the hardest, I think, rehearsal period. It's going to be the hardest opening night we've ever had, because even when he was ill, we knew, Grant and I, we did the show, and we had a fantastic team around us, and it went really, really well, and everybody loved it, although they missed Andy, obviously. But this time, we hoped he was coming back, and we knew he would come back, as he did. But this time, we're going out there knowing that he's not coming back, and that is going to be the hardest thing. That first day of rehearsal, we used to always meet for a Costa coffee at 9 o'clock and have a laugh, and then go into the first day of rehearsal. And that first day is going to be just hell. It really will be horrible.
Well, Alan, we hope it's not too long and not too far away before you guys can get in front of a live audience again. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. But until then, stay safe.
We're going to say, oh, it's not too long before we're doing a tribute to you.
Not at all. Not at all. God, Alan, you haven't changed since the first time I saw you 5 years ago. Listen, thanks for joining us. You take care. Pleasure. And we'll catch up with you again soon. Thanks, Allan Stewart.
Pleasure. Thank you, Ross. Bye.
Grant Stott, are you with us?
I am indeed. Hello, Ross. How are you?
First of all, condolences, Grant. We know how close you were to Andy, and thanks for taking the time out to join us for this show.
Yeah, no, it still doesn't feel real. I'm sure a lot of people are kind of feeling that at the moment. Certainly that's how I'm feeling. I mean, it's funny, you look at yourself at this time of year normally, and we would have just finished working together at the Kings, and so it's not unusual for me to be away from Andy right now. We would sort of take our own downtime and do our own thing. So, but it's just that fact that he's not at the end of the phone, which was a common occurrence between the two of us. So, yeah, still absolutely coming to terms with it, but it's still a shock. Still really is a shock.
How much influence did you take from Andy? Because sometimes when I hear you speaking, I can hear Andy. And I don't know if it comes naturally, or if it's just because we're hanging out so long together, or if it's just, you are just like that because you're so close.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much common knowledge that I, shall we say, inherited and, took on a lot of Andy's mannerisms and the way he spoke and the way he would emphasize certain words. Look at my booty. He would do things like that, and yeah, and I think that is just part and parcel. And sometimes I would do it on stage with him, and he would just kind of look at me going, "That's my act." But that was just a sort of natural thing. We could read each other really well. We knew what we were thinking a lot at the time, and I mean, I just idolized him. I think that's probably how I would sum it up, is that I looked up to him. I was a fan of his on the telly in the 80s, and then, fast forward 10 years or so, then I start working with him on stage, and then we progressed to working at the Fringe together. So yeah, I idolised him as a punter, watched him on telly, and idolised him as a guy who worked with him on stage, and then as a partner as we became latterly.
A lot of people recognise you from radio and as a presenter, but for many years, but you always had this bug to get on the stage, didn't you? And tell me about how you and Andy you first met, and how it blossomed into you getting on the stage, because I know Andy helped you along the way with a lot of advice.
Yeah, and that was very typical of Andy, and what has the more I've been thinking about him of late is just how generous a performer and a person he was. Because one of the first conversations we ever had was at a bar. It was a hotel in Edinburgh. I just finished Panto here at the Kings in Edinburgh. He'd come down because he knew the owner of the place, and we met at the bar, and I was a wee bit starstruck, and we clicked. And within half an hour of getting chatting, he was like, he said to me, "We must work together." He says, "You should come and do Panto in Aberdeen," because he'd been doing it up there for a couple of years now. I'd love that. I says, "That'd be great, but I'm working down in Edinburgh on the radio and things like that." But that was one of the first things I remember him saying to me: "You should come and work with me up in Aberdeen." And we just had that little click. Anyway, circumstances meant I never went to Aberdeen. He came to Edinburgh, and he'd worked for a year with Allan, and then Allan went away to Wimbledon. Then I worked with him with Gerard Kelly and Peter Pan, and then Allan came back, and with the three of us for the very first time. So we kind of worked. I'd worked with Allan, Andy'd worked with Allan, I'd worked with Andy. But the first time we all came together as a three was in 2000 in Dick Whittington, and once the three of us got together, that's when it really kind of took off, and we became big pals, and it became a regular thing at the Kings. And then to sort of break away from that, as you said, I did always hanker. I was always going to go to drama school. That was my plan when I was all the way through high school. 4 O grades and 2 hires. That's what you needed to get into drama college in the 80s. And then I left school, waved goodbye to everybody. I'm going to be an actor. And it didn't happen. The first sort of real reality check I think I had in life was when I got a knockback from every drama school and drama college right up and down the country. Glasgow, the Royal Scottish Academy, as it was then. Queen Margaret here in Edinburgh, which is where Andy had gone to himself, all knocked me back. So I kind of thought that had gone. And then through doing Panto with him, and he knew that I'd wanted, because I didn't just treat Panto as a gig to do at Christmas because I was that guy of kids telly or the local radio. I really wanted to learn, and I really watched everybody around me, and Andy kind of picked up on that, and a couple of people had said you should go and do something together. Eddie Jackson, for one. And anyway, and I was having this conversation, and it's become a bit of a running joke now, but I was in Andy's dressing room one Christmas and saying, I love doing Panto, it's fantastic. I would just love to do a play. It's that thing just to see if I can actually get out on a stage and do a bit of proper acting. But I don't know how it would ever happen. I don't know who's ever going to ask me. No one's ever going to ask me. And quick as a flash, Andy just said, I'll do a play with you. Why don't I do a play with you? And those words still ring through now, and they were so important. But to him, it was just like a natural, generous thing. Well, if I can help you, he didn't need to work with me to do a play, but he was like, well, let's us do a play, because he knew what it meant to me. We got on well together, and it was like, well, let's see what we can do, and that was the beginning of our partnership at the Fringe, and I'll never forget that, and that generosity, because he was taking a risk. I had nothing proven other than these years on stage as in the Panto with him. Mm-hmm. And he was there by my side throughout the rehearsals and throughout the whole process, because as putting something on, as we learnt as well, is a big, there's a big undertaking, and there's a lot of steps to get to the opening night, and Andy was there with me and guiding me through, and I learnt every night, and I think we totted up. It was there was over 1,600 times we were on stage together over the years of doing the Fringe and all the sort of Panto performances.
Allan Stewart said to ask you how many hours it was. He said you would know.
well, the hours thing. What Alan's referring to was that tight three that we had backstage at the Kings, and we worked it out just during Goldilocks and the Three Bears, because we would generally. You'd come in before the half for the matinee, so you'd have 10 or 15 minutes in Andy's dressing room for a blether. How you doing? What you've been doing today? What's going on? And then we would have the 15-minute interval, and then we would do the same again before the show at night, and then the same again during the evening show. So that was it was half an hour during over and above the matinee, half an hour at night. So that's about an hour per day, 6 days a week. So we worked out it was about 42 hours over any one season of Panto. The three of us would sit and talk pish, and that is the sum of it. But it was unmissable, because we would sit in the same seats. We wouldn't move. Andy's OCD wouldn't allow us. Once Andy did something once, that's how you had to do it for the entire run. And if that meant sitting in that seat, and so Allan had to sit over there, I would sit here, and Andy would sit on his couch over there, and that was the dynamic of the three of us. And we did that for years and years and years. The same way we did a pre-show hug before our first performance of one run. Three of us just went, let's have a group hug before we open the show, and we just gave each other a big massive hug and screamed out. And we had to do that every single performance, matinee and evening, and we've done that for 10, 15 years.
Wow.
And Andy and I would have a wee fist pump before we went on stage at the festival. That became our thing. He would look up, and I had a wee superstition that I would always look up to my gran, because that's what I did the very first time I walked out on stage. We just looked up, because she died when I was about 8, and Andy did something for his mum, so we had these little. And I got that from Andy, this sort of superstition of that goes with a show, and I've kind of got that. I've again taken that from him as well, and all his little tiny superstitions I now sort of feel once I've done it once, I must continue to do it. We have our Zoom with the boys, Allan Stewart, Jordan Young and Pix, who's our MD, all through lockdown. The 5 of us would Zoom every Thursday night after, we'd have a wee clap for the NHS and whatever, and we would get a bottle, and I would sit here, right where I am now, and we would all have a Zoom, and we did that every single Thursday after the 8 o'clock clap, and we kept that right through, right up until he went down to Milton Keynes. And there was could we do it on Friday? Because no, we've done it on a Thursday 8 o'clock. We can't change the routine. Couldn't change the routine because Andy's OCD would go into overdrive, so we had to stick with that. But yeah, stickler for routine.
Now, I must mention, lots of people will be wondering why there's a Superman outfit behind you, because everybody knows Andy was a big Batman fan. So
he was a massive Batman. And this was very early on. I would say, "Oh, you like Batman? I prefer Superman." He'd be like, Superman. So he couldn't equate that, but that's how that was it. So I was always more of a Superman fan than a Batman fan, and so, Andy, if you were buying him something for his birthday or for his Christmas, I would get him something with Batman, and likewise he would always get me something with Superman, and that's what he got me. He got me a Superman bathrobe one Christmas, and so that's going to be its permanent place now. I'm even looking around now. I mean, Andy, again, I talked about his generosity as a man with regards to what he did for me professionally, but I'm sure many other people who work with him will back this up. But he would just buy you stuff. He loved being generous. He loved giving you a gift, and I've got this coaster here, which is sat in this sort of little makeshift studio of mine, and has done since I put it together. And this was a coaster that he bought me. Still got the price on it, £2.50. He bought me this when we were up in Ullapool on tour. We did a tour of Kiss Me Honey Honey, which is the first play that we did together.
Yeah.
And we took it up to Ullapool, and we drove all across Scotland, just the two of us. And that's what you do. He would buy you a wee. He says, that'll always make you think of me and you in Ullapool. And I still have it. And I can go around the house, and there's little things that he's given me. There's little gifts that he bought, and yeah, he was just such a lovely, caring, generous, brilliant pal.
As I said to Alan, I think the nation will be, and Andy would want you guys to, carry the torch. It meant a lot to, you guys meant a lot to him as well. And just in closing, do you have any, I know it's hard to pick out one, but any fond memories or stories that you can share with us that kind of sum up Andy?
Oh God, how long have we got? I mean, is this a week-long broadcast that you're doing here? No, there are so many, and I'll come off this and think of another one, and then they'll think of another one 5 minutes after that. But there was one story that we always talked about, and it was just before we did our first play at the Fringe. And I'd gone up to Perth. He says, "Come up to Perth. We'll have a script meeting, and we'll read the script." So we read the script about once at 5 o'clock, and then opened the prosecco. And he cooked me dinner, so I had steak, and he even cooked me mushrooms. He hated mushrooms, but he cooked them because he knows I loved them. So we had a very romantic dinner, the two of us in his flat, a couple of bottles of prosecco, a few laughs, and then we went out for a walk. And it was a beautiful May evening up in Perth, and we're going for he says, "I'm just going to take you around a few of my favourite bars and places in Perth," and he was showing me around and stuff, and showed me where his dad's kilt shop was that he worked in, and all that, and showing me all these wee local landmarks. And I was saying, I said, "Andy," I says, there's so many people who do well for themselves, but rarely come back to sort of towns or cities, especially smaller ones like Perth. When they do well, they go to Glasgow, they move to Edinburgh, they go to London, they rarely come back and base themselves here. And it's obvious because he loved Perth, he loved that whole area, and he loved everything about Perth. And I says, the locals will be appreciative of that. And he was going, "Yeah, well, Grant, I have to say it is nice, everybody kind of knows who you are, and everybody knows your family, and everybody knows your name, and if I walk in a bar on my own, I'll not be stopped long before somebody starts with a wee blether." And we're just at the beautiful point of this conversation when Andy's sort of basking in the sort of the feel-good factor of local boy done good back home in Perth. And this guy comes round the corner just at this point, and then he turns around, clocks Andy, and just went, "All right, Sandy, how's it going?" At that point, it was a timing thing, and Andy immediately went, no, it's not, it's Andy. Oh. And it was just that moment of the time and the place and the whole thing had happened at that right point. And I felt my knees. I was on the pavement, absolutely howling, because it was just one of these perfectly timed little horrible moments that go wrong for you, and it went wrong for Andy. And we talked about this all the time. All right, Sandy, just and it's that whole thing. You can never ever get carried away with yourself. You can never ever get too big for your boots.
Sure, and of course, Andy being Andy with his comedic genius would have played on that moment of
he did. And he did, and he kept going back. He says, "I've seen that guy loads, and he always calls me Andy." And I'm like, "Why did you not call me Andy that night walking down the road with Big Grant?" But there's so many stories, there's so many moments, there's so many on-stage antics, off-stage antics, and to be honest, that hasn't quite sunk in. That I'm not going to have any more of those, and it's a massive loss, and I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss him terribly. It's interesting. I was thinking back to working with Andy, and you talk about learning of people and watching them, and I did. I watched him like a hawk, and I was talking to Jordan about this the other night. It's like I remember we would be rehearsing a moment in the play, a scene, and he would stop. Andy would just stop, and then just kind of take himself off, and he would just pad around the rehearsal room floor, and his wee head was going 10 to the dozen. And then he would come back and go, "Right, got it. That line that you say when you sit down just doesn't work." He says, that doesn't work. So what I think it is, if you wait to sit down and then say this line. So what he'd basically done is he knew that something was wrong in the script, and it just wasn't sitting right, or it wasn't flowing. He would then go away, dissect it, find a solution, and then bring it to the floor. And I think that sort of sums up his professionalism, because Andy wasn't a ton who would just arrive, do the lines, and bugger off again. He wanted to make sure that everything that he did on that stage was absolutely as good as it could be. And similarly, if you were on stage with him, he wanted you to be absolutely as good as you could be as well. And because he knew it was all for the better good. It was all for the good of the show. And it was that. It was like, you can, if there's something not quite right on a rehearsal process, don't just feel, "Oh, I can't say anything," or don't just feel that's not right. Question it, and then either the director or Andy or whatever would say, no, I hear what you're saying, but no, it does work because of that. And he would give you a reason why, instead of saying, "I don't like that." He would tell you why he doesn't like it. And it was just how he was just so good at what he did, and he could see it, he could visualize it so much. And it was a masterclass getting to work with Andy Gray. And I'm sure with all the people that you're going to be speaking to about him over this time, they will back that up. You came away a better performer having worked with him than you were beforehand.
Grant, I want to thank you for taking part in this today, because I know it's a tough ask at this time. Everything's still a bit raw, but I just want to thank you for taking the time out to come on to this marathon tribute to Andy, which is no less than he deserves.
It is no, and I'm so glad, and the tribute, like what you're doing, Ross, and all these fabulous people that you've got on who will all hold Andy very dear. But I think the outpouring of love that he got, when he got diagnosed with cancer was incredible, right? And I thought that was just amazing, because you don't normally get to see that kind of affection whilst you're still alive. Anyway, fast forward to when we do actually lose him, and it just eclipses that. And he would have been absolutely blown away by the level of love, and from people leaving flowers at the doors of the King's Theatre to the tech guys putting the bat sign up.
That was amazing.
At the front of the King's over his funeral. I mean, stuff that just took my breath away. Grief hits you in waves, and you'll be getting along business, doing your day, and then something will come and hit you. All these little things, the flowers at the King's door, the bat sign at the theatre, messages that I've been getting, let alone what poor Claire and his partner Tamara have been receiving as well. But I was, getting cards, and it's just, the love for him was utterly phenomenal and well deserved. And I'm so glad that Claire, particularly, and we Anna will be able to hold on to these lovely things that have been said about him, because he was a real one-off, a very special man.
Grant Stott, thanks very much.
Thank you, Ross.
Joining me now is actor and director Sam Kane. Sam, you've known Andy for the past 10 years. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, mate. Thank you so much for asking me. And an honour. What, you know, heartbroken that this man is he's left us without so many laughs that we, you know, were promised to us for the rest of our existence. It's devastating news. What a man.
Now, gonna just begin first of all by asking how you and Linda are doing, because obviously we know that you were one of the first people in the UK to be highlighted as you know, with this horrible illness. How are you guys doing now?
That's right. Yeah. We'll go back to last March now. It's been a long recovery. There's no two ways about it. But you know, so much better now. Looking down the barrel of a gun at one point, you know, and thank God we stayed on this mortal coil, and we're okay. Linda's a lot better than me. I've got the old underlying asthma, so my breath, you'll see me catching breath every now and again. But apart from that, you know, just getting better every day. Thank goodness.
Well, you're looking well anyway, and in good spirits as always. And you know, a lot of the people watching will know you from shows like Brookside, but you also you do mainly directing now. Tell us about some of the stuff you did with Andy and how you first came to meet.
Well, I was doing Panto with a guy called Philip Meeks, who was a playwright. He'd done some writing for Emmerdale and television serial stuff, and he said he really liked the way I directed the Panto that he was in. I was very kind to him, apparently. Oh, that was a first. And he said, I've written this play. Will you have a read of it and tell me what you think? And, you know, I had a read of it and I fell in love with it immediately. He told me the concept of how it worked. It was a multi-role play, but it was only going to be two people in it. And he's speaking about these two guys, one of which I'd met a long, long time ago in a kids show on a Saturday morning, a long time ago when I was we were doing some publicity for Brookside, and that was Grant Stott. I can't remember the name of the show. It was a Saturday morning show, like Tiz was, but it was up in Scotland. Anyway, that's how I met Grant a long time before that. And he said another guy called Andy Gray, and I'd heard of Andy. So many people I knew had told me about this guy and what he was good at and what have you. And then by hook or by crook, we get down to the rehearsal point and the read through, and I get down outside the Playhouse Theatre there. It's what's her name, Karen Corrigan's office, which is right next door. And we do this read through, and I meet Andy, who now I've read up a bit about, and I realize he's this powerhouse actor. And so I walk in the room a little bit intimidated, and my goodness, did he alleviate every problem that I'd considered as soon as I walked through. He was the most welcoming guy, my goodness. And we were like just really good mates from that moment on.
I think in this business, you need to have the likable factor. And but Andy had the lovable factor. Everybody loved him. Everybody who came into, you know, from people who saw him on stage, or whether you watched him on TV, or whether you'd met him personally, he was the same guy, and he had funny bones, didn't he?
You know, it's so many levels that you fall in love with people, and with Andy, you could literally be rocking and crying. I mean, I have to use this all the time. That was used more when I was with Andy Gray, because when you laugh, it just restricts your lungs for some God knows reason. So I was just like literally falling over, laughing 1 minute, and then just having to use the hanky to wipe my eyes because he was break my heart the next. And he would emulate that within his performance as well. It's the only actor I've ever seen that could do it to such a level that people didn't know which end of the spectrum of emotion was going to come next. But they knew as soon as he hit them with both, this was going to be a tough ride. My goodness, he could deliver a performance like no one I've ever known before. To the point I remember saying to him in the rehearsal room, I said, the problem you've got, mate, I said, your 50% is better than everybody else's 120%. And he went, well, you know, he just shrugged his shoulders. He was so humble, but what a talent. And I'm not saying this now because he's no longer here. My goodness, I'd say it to his face every single day. And to be honest with you, everybody knows it. I remember sat behind the desk as the director, and I've got this powerhouse stood in front of me. This guy, it's obvious that he's incredible. So I'm slightly intimidated. There's no two ways about it. But what he did, it opened my eyes to everything. And this is the humility of the man. He stood there on the first day, the read through, and I watched his vulnerability as a man, as a human being, not as an actor, of that trepidation of going, well, how do I do this? Do I say this? And I'd watch him get things wrong, and I'd go, Andy, and he went, oh, well, you know, how did I get that wrong? And I said to him one day, I said, we're all just the same, aren't we? We're all just scared up there, and slowly but surely we build the confidence through the rehearsal, and then we realize, oh God, I am good at this, I forgot. But that vulnerability and then I was going to say naivety, then it's not naivety, it's complete knowledge, but it's only one word. It's the vulnerability and the humility of him. That's two words. Just it resonated so massively in everything that he did. To watch him be unsure of himself when everybody else around him was kind of like hanging on his coattails. He was our lifeboat dragging us through. But even then he'd say to me, he said, you're thinking of things I could never think of. You're taking this to places we never think of. So we bounced off each other really, really well. And my goodness, we had a few moments as well where we bounced off each other in the opposite direction, because he was a man who stood his ground. But he was also, in as much as that he would stand up with his idea, if you gave him something that was perceivably better than what he thought of, he would completely back away and he'd go, yeah, you're right. Well, let's do it that way because that's better than the way I thought of. So that is massive, certainly from my point of view, because that's the way I perform as well. It's all about coming out with the best possible outcome. And Andy was all about that. The guy was a supernova. He flew past, and everybody that got a whiff of it, you know, it was with them for life. Whether it was long or whether it was short, he stuck and he made his mark wherever he went. God bless him. I'm getting emotional now. He was an incredible human being, you know, I'll never forget him getting undressed in front of me in the rehearsal room, and he had those underpants on with ball bags on the back of it. And I was like, what? I've seen Andy's packet more than his mum as growing up. It's the weirdest thing in the world. But you cannot think of him without laughing. And that's what I love about that. You know, he's gone, but he will never be forgotten. It's weird. You never decide what you're going to remember. You know, it's the heightened emotions, I think, that you go through in your life. Those are the things that stick to you, whether they're heightened for sadness or for joy or whatever it may be. And it was just constant, you know, where like you've just been plugged in and you're in a fuse, you know, and you're one of those, what's this thing with all sparks come off it. That was what life was like around Andy Gray, because I'm thinking about the rehearsal room now and him just pulling a face to become another character, and me just literally pissing myself laughing, just not being able to talk for the next 10 minutes because me and Grant were on the floor and he was going, I only pulled a face. And that was it. It was just, he could just do that and he'd have you. You know, there was one point in the rehearsal, and it was a really tough story, this, because Andy's character was so multifaceted, as well as playing all the other characters. But the main hub of it, he'd lost his son in this storyline. And there was one point where he told the story of how he was hiding it and the story of how he'd lost his son. And he broke down crying. And he had us all crying in the room. But I said to Andy, do it again, but try not to cry this time. Try to hold back the tears. So we see that you're desperately trying not to cry, but you can't, you know, hold it all back. Oh, Jesus Christ, every time I saw it, I was, you know, when you sob when you're watching something, but this wasn't sobbing. I was trying to catch my breath. I was broken down. The man broke me with his performance. He'd go, Jesus Christ, what are you acting? But that was it. It's what he could do. The ability to do what he did without even thinking about it and just walk in and become that. And that, you know, it reverberated through the rest of his life. Because he would just, whoever walked in the room, Linda met him. She came up and he was like, in awe, I'm meeting Linda Lusardi, you know. And Linda was going, my God, he's like one of the most incredible people you'll ever meet. That's what he did to everybody, literally everybody.
Sam, thanks very much for taking the time again to join us. It's been really nice talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Cheers, mate.
Joining me now through the wonders of technology is actress Maureen Carr. Maureen, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thanks, Ross. Yeah.
You know, I was looking at the cast list for City Lights, and I couldn't believe the amount of people who have actually appeared in City Lights, and you were one of them. What do you remember about that?
Well, the thing I remember is I got the job and I turned up with peroxide blonde hair, and Ron Bain, the director, said to me, "What have you done to your hair?" I dyed it blonde. I didn't think, but I just remember it was fun. Absolutely. I mean, a joy to do. Yeah, great fun. Brilliant.
What was your first encounter with Andy?
That's what I was trying to remember. I think it was in Perth, early 80s, very early 80s. And he was just blown away by him. He was hilarious, made you laugh all the time, made me laugh all the time, and that was the problem when you got on stage with him. I didn't work a lot with Andy, but I did do a play called Can't Pay, Won't Pay, Dario Fo, adapted by Alex Norton, and it was fantastic fun with Stuart Hepburn, Anne Downey and Sandy Morton and Andy Gray. So I remember being on stage with him, and we had a scene where I had I was to pretend I was pregnant. I don't know if you know the play. It's a political play, and it was during the poll tax kind of thing.
I see. Right.
So I was pretending I was pregnant, and to my husband, and Stuart Hepburn, and my waters. So we'd stolen food from the supermarket. The characters stolen food. So I had this net bag underneath my coat. So the husbands were talking. So it ended up that to get out of it, I had to, my waters broke, and it was olives. It was meant to be, the water came out from this bag in between my legs on stage, and that was meant to happen. So I'm going, oh, my water's up, to get out of the situation, right? Not get caught by the husbands. But this time in Greenock, Guildhall, is it Guildhall? Can't remember the name. It's no longer there anyway. In Greenock, and I had pasta, bags of pasta, and that had burst accidentally. So there was pasta coming out, falling all over the place. It was everywhere on the stage. Sandy Morton went. Andy Gray comes, walks on, and walks off again. And he just leaves because I was meant to get carried off. He was just a joy to work with, but he was naughty. He was a naughty man. And 30 years I've known him, 30 odd years. I still can't believe he's gone. But he always made me laugh all the time. And then the next time I worked with them was City Lights as well, but the next time was Panto with Claire when we did Cinderella. And that was just a joy. It was absolutely a joy to work with him and Claire, and of course Grant and Allan, and it was super. It was brilliant.
And what was it like off stage?
Oh, well, he was just on go all the time. He was number 10 was high. He was 10 all the time, just full of fun. What a guy, so full of fun and a joker. He could be serious too, obviously, but he was just so full of fun. He really was. I loved it. Gillian Duncan used to scare him. She used to scare everybody in the Panto. And it was just a joy, really. He was great fun and always up for a laugh, but took his job seriously, obviously. Tried to make you laugh as well, but it got better, I think, as the years went on. In Panto with Claire, he'd try, but Claire was great. She was up for him, she just knew what was coming. And it was great. It was really brilliant. Good time in the Panto. And then Martin and I saw him in Goldilocks in the Three Bears. And to see, we were in the audience when he came on, just to see the audience were just cheering when, and hear Andy Gray coming on, Noel. Just joy. It's joyous to see that from the audience. It really was. He was so well loved. So well loved. It was brilliant, and whole range he could do. And what also I found out, I knew it anyway because he was always text people and say how you doing, but he was so supportive to loads of people. He found out he texted me to say well done or keep this up, keep it going. Really supportive. A really supportive guy.
Maureen, that is absolutely brilliant. Thanks very much for taking the time to chat to us today.
Oh, lovely to speak to you, darling. Thank you.
It was one of those things that I'd been asked a few times, and then I was doing other things a lot of the time. And then it was one of those things, do I want to do something that should be the same week in, week out? Because I quite like what I like about acting is, or do what I do as a term, is doing something different all the time. So whether, something in the Fringe or Panto or a radio play or a part in a television, 2,000 Acres Sky or something like that. So I enjoyed that aspect of acting, and I wasn't sure about doing a soap. And then they asked, and I thought, well, and one of the producers said, well, we've got this idea for a character who's a bit of a jack-the-lad, and he's a bit of a rogue, but he's a nice rogue, and, there's no harm in him. And so I thought, well, it's Chancer. So it's a slightly fatter, balder Chancer. Thanks. So I thought and the part was lovely. I thought Pete Galloway, was a great character to do because he was all those things. And it was a great opportunity to work with Gail as well. And work with all the guys on River City, and I loved it. I loved doing it. It was great, week in, week out, and there was always something happening. And then, we did, interesting storyline about the bipolar thing and all that, which was interesting to play. But I just loved because there's a very strong camaraderie on the show because we're there all the time. 7 till 7 every day. So it's a great atmosphere, and the crew are the hardest working crew this side of the acres. So thanks very much. And she's away for a jobby, right?
Andy Gray there talking about his role as Pete in River City. Now, the producer he was probably talking about in that clip is joining us now, Martin McCarthy. Hello, Martin. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ross. Thank you.
Andy was talking there about initially getting offered the role of Pete, and he said there, well, it's Chancer. You know, would that have been yourself? He was had that conversation with.
Yeah, we did have that conversation also with Kieran Hannigan, who was the exec producer at the time. What had happened was, Ross, was just before that, I wrote and directed a play with Andy called God Bless Les Lockhead, where Andy was one of the 3 actors in it, and he was brilliant in that play, fantastic and funny. And when I went back to River City, I was basically saying, I think we need to get this guy in if we can. So we wrote a character who was originally called Motherwell Kev, and it was meant to be a former guy from Ravenscraig who'd worked at Ravenscraig, and a number of things, because I come from Lanarkshire, that originally was the character. But then obviously Andy Gray, the fantastic Andy Gray, isn't from Lanarkshire. He was from Perth, and that was how Pete Galloway sort of got born, through talking to Andy about it and looking at what impact he had as an actor and as a person, and how could we play to his strengths.
And how much of the role did Andy bring to the role himself?
He brought a lot to the role. I mean, one of the kind of the type of crazy thing that can happen when you're creating a character for a show like River City is we now don't have the blanket agreement for music. So we were having Pete Galloway coming in, who was an Elvis fanatic, and we couldn't use any Elvis music. And that became ridiculous. You were like, right, how do we do that? And it was Andy that came up with a lot of the ways around it, and a lot of the other tracks. He was a fan of Elvis, but he was also a fan of anybody who was even remotely like Elvis. So all of that, Pete Galloway's Elvis stuff, his car, his sports car was Andy's idea. His belt, the way he did his hair, the way he did his eyebrows, the button on the shirt that was down, he won more than probably any of us would have ever attempted in our lives. That was all Andy. He just said, Pete's a guy that will push the envelope. He's a guy who will always try to go one step more than everyone else. That was all from Andy. One of the questions that Kieran Hannigan, who was the exec at the time, asked me was, can Andy do serious stuff as well as comic stuff? Because most of the stuff that Kieran had seen Andy in was comedy. And I had said to him in the play that Andy had just done with me, where I laughed every day from morning till night with what he did. But he had one speech in it which told you why his character was the way he was and why it was all coming from a place of kind of pain. And every single time he did that speech, I had tears in my eyes about how real it was and where it came from. So I said he can do whatever we give him. And he really proved that in some of the stuff with Caitlin was some of the best stuff I've ever seen in River City, I think. And also the stuff he did with Mikey, so Mikey was a paranoid schizophrenic who Pete befriended and then went on the run with. And it was Ron Donachie that played that. And you were looking at 2 actors at the very top of their game all the way through that. How they rehearsed it, how they worked together, the same as he did with Gail, who plays Caitlin. I mean, she talks so highly of him from that point of view of how involved he was, how much he gave to all the serious stuff. He enjoyed doing the serious stuff because it showed that he could do it. But, you know, as soon as cut was called, he'd be out with a wisecrack. That's the way Andy was.
Martin McCarthy, thanks very much for taking the time to join us this evening.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
My next guest also worked with Andy on River City, and he's with us right now. Stephen Purdon joining us. Stephen, thanks for coming on the show and to pay your tribute to Andy Gray.
No worries. Thanks for having me, mate. Thanks for having me.
So was River City your introduction to Andy? Was that when you first met him?
Yes. I first met Andy. He was down for a costume fitting down at Dumbarton at the studios at River City. And instantly we just got talking, and within 10 seconds I'm giggling and laughing just the way Andy made you feel as soon as you were talking to him. So from then on, man, we got on really great, and we had a lot of things in common, like good with the same taste in television stuff. Like he introduced me to like Peaky Blinders and stuff like that, and I couldn't wait to get to work the next day to talk to him about it. Do you know what I mean? Once I'd watched like 2 or 3 episodes, and we just got on great. And I remember some stuff we done together in River City. God, man, there was a scene we done, me, Andy, and Sanjeev, and Jerry Miller, and there was one camera on Sanjeev, another camera was on me, Jerry, and Andy. And me and Andy just could not stop laughing for about 15, 20 minutes. We just kept buckling during the scene, and poor Sanjeev, it was on him. And it got to the point where me and Andy had to put our jackets over our face because we just couldn't stop laughing. And that was Andy. Like, when you were on set, as professional and serious as he was, taking his work very serious, he never took it too serious to a point where you were intimidated or you felt you couldn't relax and have a laugh. And he was just, his energy was just unbelievable, and his personality, and just every time I was with him, I laughed every time.
Lots of people talking about how great an actor he actually was. Did you learn anything from Andy as an actor? Did he give you any advice?
Yes, 100%. Especially stuff him and Ron Donachie done in River City. That was phenomenal, that stuff. But later on, after Andy was ill and stuff, and he was getting back on his feet and he was at the hospital, I was doing the Benny Lynch play, and Claire was doing it, Andy's daughter. So me and Andy got talking quite a lot. And we had a few problems pre-production, like doing that before the show got off the road. We had a few problems, and Andy was just a great sounding board for me. He always kept in touch. And when he got to the hospital, I drove through to Perth, and we sat for a full day together. And he just gave me so much advice, because I hadn't done theatre for a long time since River City was starting and stuff, so I hadn't done a lot of theatre. And he just gave me so much advice, and he helped me through it. And it was a challenging time getting Benny Lynch off the ground, getting the actual play up and running. And Andy was just absolutely unbelievable, to the point where if he was healthier, I wish he'd directed it. Do you know what I mean? Because it was his eye for detail and everything. He helped me. And even when the show was up and running, he sent me a wee book about boxing and signed it and stuff. And he was just always there, man. I could just phone him or text him, and his advice was great. And knowing you've got somebody there that can just have had any problems at all, he'd pick the phone up. And just sitting with him when he was at the hospital was a great day in itself. Probably the last time I seen him.
Would you like to have worked with Andy in Panto? Because you're obviously a big a Panto veteran yourself.
It would have been, I mean, that would be the dream, do you know what I mean? Working with Andy and Grant and stuff. I've seen Andy in Panto, and he's the kind of guy who just walks on the stage and he can have the audience in the palm of his hand without even saying anything. And that in itself is just testament to the man.
If you could sum Andy up in a few words, how would you sum him up?
Talented, generous, just an absolute gentleman.
Stephen Purdon, thanks very much.
No worries, mate. Thank you.
My next guest is former River City star Paul James Corrigan. Paul, thanks for joining us for a special tribute to Andy Gray.
Thanks for having me, Ross. Cheers, pal.
Now, I really want to know, obviously you had already left River City by the time Andy arrived. How did you first get to know Andy?
No, well, I was still there when Andy arrived, because I get brought back for Kira Lucchese's, who plays Stella. I get brought back for her exit story, and I'm pretty sure Andy was just sort of there and starting it, and so we did. So he was there when I was there, but when I originally left, I don't think he was there. But aye.
Would that have been your first meeting with him? Was that? Had you worked with him before that, or?
I worked with him before that, but I'd known Andy for a good few years before that. But Oranmore and all that stuff. But the first time I worked with Andy was Panto at the Edinburgh Kings. It was my first kudos Panto, and I had to go to London for the audition to meet Michael and Jonathan and all them, and I didn't know what it was for. I thought it was for the hydro, but when I got there, Michael was like, "No, it's we're going to hopefully get you into Edinburgh Kings. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs." I went, right, okay. And I'm thinking, well, who do you want me to play? You know, because I was Allan, Andy and Grant, they're established, they're the funny guys. And I'm going, right, okay. And he says, have you got a speech prepared or what? And I went, aye, I've got a wee he says, no, actually, he says, Elaine C. Smith tells me that, because I played buttons at the, at the Beacon in Greenock. So Elaine told him about that, and Michael says, oh, just give your button speech. And I went, right, okay. So I done that. That was all fine. And he says, right, Paul, he says, what I want to do, he says, I'll cut to the chase. He says, we're doing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I would like you to play the lead dwarf. And of course I'm going, eh? and he says, but I want you to do it like that. I went, right, okay. Like a buttons type feel. And then he told me about, he says, have you seen Shrek the musical? And I says, no. He says, well, Lord Farquhar's got these wee fake legs. He says that's how we're going to work the dwarfs. So it's like a harness around your waist and these wee fake legs, and you're basically on your knees for the whole show. And so anyway, so Michael offered it to me there and then, and of course I phoned Elaine to let her know how I got on, and she says, "Oh, Andy will be thrilled. Andy will be thrilled." I mean, of course. I was, oh God, right. Oh, I must phone him. I better phone him. And he already knew, but I was in Euston Station waiting to get my train back, and I was phoning Andy, and it kept ringing out. I was like, right, okay. So and then he phoned me back eventually, and he went, Mr. Corrigan. I went, what's happening, Andy? He says, I believe you're joining us. I went, aye, mate, I'm joining you. I'm coming for you. And he just busted laughing. And he was just like, he says, Paul, you're going to have a great time. He says, myself, Big Granty and Alan and the crew, everybody's just great. But I was really, really nervous. And I remember my first day of rehearsals, I got there, and of course Andy was there, the whole crew and the cast were there, and Ed, the director, Ed Curtis. And Andy was just straight away, he says, right, he says, sit here, we'll do this, we'll get a chat, we'll talk about the script, and we'll talk about, the character and all that sort of stuff. Andy basically says to me, he says, Paul, just, obviously there's lines on the page, he says, but feel free to play with it. Just feel free to play with it. He says, we do it every year. He says, we get a script, and by the end of week 2, and week 1 in rehearsals, you might as well, chuck the script out the window. So the rehearsal process was absolutely brilliant, but there was one scene where Snow White has been poisoned, and my line is, we run on as the dwarves, and I go, oh no, and then Andy comes on and goes, what happened? I'm going, oh, Sadista must have got to her first. That was Big Grant's character, he played the baddie. Oh, she's dead. That was the line, she's dead. And Andy went, oh, well, that's the show then, we'll just stop there. Well, we looked at the audience and the whole place erupted. And I just remember sitting going, wow, like he had the audience in the palm of his hand. And it, to sit and to watch, not alone watch, but be on the same stage as somebody like that and just go, wow, that's pretty incredible. But Andy was quite, he was quite hard to cops on stage, but he would make everybody else laugh. And so that particular scene, and so in the interval, we'd always go to Andy's dressing room and sit and get a blether and all that. That's just what he did. And I says to Allan Stewart, I says, Allan, I'm going to cops him. I'm going to try and cops him. He went, good luck with that. I says, no, here's what I'm thinking. Andy told me a story. He did Snow White years ago, and there was one guy who was a dwarf, and he only had one line, and he kept forgetting it. Like he kept forgetting his cue, and Andy had to kick him and go, right, that's it. And his line was, she's been poisoned, and then everybody reacts. But the way the guy said it, it was like, she's been poisoned. So I says to Allan, Allan, would you, because obviously, they're the turns. I says, would you mind if, and Allan went, no, great, do it. No, get him, do it. I went, right, okay, so we're doing the show, and that scene comes up, and we all run on our knees, and Andy comes rushing down the stage, going, what happened? I went, oh, Sadista must have got to her first. She's been poisoned. And I just remember, and he looked me dead in the eye, and he just went, And Allan's gone, Andy, it's your line next. He's going, and I got my belter. I was like, yes, at least I can say I got into cops on stage. It was quite funny. Aye. But aye. So many memories of Andy. I mean, like, you know, you talk about Andy and the Oran Moor, Andy. It was just, Andy had time for everybody, you know, he really did. And he was good at that. He was good at making people feel welcome. He was honest about it. He would never lie to you. He would always say, look, you know, this is what I think, and X, Y, and Z. And I learned a lot from him. Well, not just a lot of people, but Andy in particular as well. You know, it was really good to me. And of course, after that kudos Panto, I got more and more, and you know, and it's once you're in the kudos family, if you like, and you do well and you impress and folk like you, then yeah. So.
Well, I mean, a phenomenal actor who touched the hearts of everybody he came into contact with.
Yeah.
Andy Gray. Paul, James Corrigan, thank you very much for taking the time.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, I could talk about him all night, but there you go.
It's such a marathon tribute, this. I think we're almost 2 hours long, and we could still, honestly, we could probably do another 2 hours.
Easy.
Part of this, it's incredible.
Yeah, trilogy.
You could do a trilogy. It's a testament to how popular Andy was, and will continue to be. We've got lots and lots of footage there that he's left in his legacy, that which I'm so grateful for. But thanks for taking the time to come on.
Not at all, mate. Anytime. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, pal. Thank you very much.
My final guest this evening is also a member of the River City cast. In fact, she's joining me from Shield Inch right now. Gail Telfer Stevens on Zoom. Gail, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ross. How are you?
We've been talking to lots of people about Andy Gray this evening. Tell us about your first encounter with Andy.
So I had never met Andy before, and although he was a real fixture of my childhood and programmes that he was involved in and things that I'd seen over the years, so he was a real part of our kind of family life with City Lights and Naked Video and all the rest of it. Anyways, I was slightly starstruck when I first met Andy, and it was on this set that I'd never encountered him before. And we were to do a scene that was outside my house, and he was basically champing the door for Drew, and I was to have a massive fight with him. So that was our first ever scene. And he said, I just remember him saying, "Right, all right, darling, that was all right, that was good." So we enjoyed it, obviously, like the first time we ever met, but I was totally starstruck and totally in awe of him. And it was pretty fantastic, because that first episode that he comes in, it's been repeated actually, he was just amazing, and I just showed everything what he could do as a performer. So it was pretty special. I didn't actually realise at that moment of what kind of my life with Andy was going to entail and how special it was going to become actually the next few years. So I just never knew from that point, but I knew it was I'm telling you it just now because I remember it really vividly. So he was just all about that. And obviously he worked obviously with so many people, and he was just all about working together, making everything great. We've got scenes next week we need to look over. So we just kind of put our head right in amongst it, and he was always, "Darling, see if you try this, that'll be good there," and always giving you more on what you had to do than himself. Always did. Always encouraged. He was actually just in the acting community they talk about feeding, and it's only now when I look back and I think, God, what an amazing opportunity that I had, because he was just such an amazing person and such an amazing feeder, because he would, encourage his counterparts every step of the way, and that's who he was totally as an actor and as a person.
Did you ever get to see Andy working on stage?
Yeah, I did actually a few times. So obviously stuff with Grant at the Fringe. So when he first came in here, it was April time, I think, and by the summer I was seeing him at the Fringe, and we'd go through and see like the Pantos as well with my wee girl. So yeah, I did. I saw him. I heard about his many kind of catchphrases for the Panto before I'd even seen the Panto. So when I went and seen all these kind of wee looks, and you know, I loved watching them. So it was a master class.
Martin McCarthy was on earlier, and he was talking on that. He said there was quite a lot of corpsing when Andy was on as well.
This is what keeps you going, you know, is like, it's the memory of the fact that you were so lucky to even have had the time that I did with him, and actually to be regarded in his life as one of his people. Do you know what I mean? That was the thing, because he was just I can't even say it. Every day was a pleasure. It really was. And it wasn't until he left that I really noticed there was a big grieving process when he left this building, never mind the building, you know. So it was just so much fun. We had so many laughs, and everything was really good around us. We always made sure we'd have a nice lunch, and do you know what I mean? An icebreaker. If things were getting a bit too tense in here, we'd go up to get a coffee, you know. I bring him a coffee in the morning, and he would go out and do a wee coffee run in the afternoon, stuff like that. I mean, honestly, I didn't even know how good I had it.
Are any anecdotes or funny stories you can tell us about your time with Andy?
Just every time we would, if we were doing a big scene, even any scene, it was always big. Eventually they got bigger, and the content was always a bit more kind of dramatic, and there were always really great storylines that we were blessed to have. And we would always say before we would do a shot, Heather on, and somebody would either or would say fire. If we were wilting a wee bit, we would say Heather on, the other person would say fire. So incidentally, for his 60th birthday, I got my bookmark. It's imprinted with Heaven on Fire, and I got a bracelet made Heaven on Fire. So that's just something that we would always say. And it was him that initiated that, but you know, it was just, that was our wee saying before we would, you know, any wedding scene, any big dramatics, all that kind of stuff, any JCB acting. When he was driving a JCB down that road out there, and it was just like, oh my God. And he loved it. He loved, but do you know what he loved? He loved driving that car. What was the car that he came in on? And it was like a really old, like, I can't even remember the name of it. Maybe it was like, not a Datsun, but it was like, it had all the American colours on it and stuff. And
right.
He had really thought about everything, you know, for him coming in, his big Elvis costume, his belt, his boots even. We've got a picture of our boots side by side. I can send you. And he had cowboy boots. And I said, I want a pair of his and hers. I want a pair of cowboy boots. And we got a pair of cowboy boots. So, you know, there was just loads of wee things that, yeah, we kind of, that you can look back on, and, you know, memories are good.
And listening to the stories that we've had tonight from Andy's friends, it's clear that he touched the hearts of everybody that he came in contact with, friends, family, and those who went to see Andy, whether it be on stage or whether he watched them on television. He touched the hearts of everybody. So in closing, I would just like to ask you how you would sum up Andy, and you know, what's your everlasting memory? What will it be?
I always said that he's a national treasure, and he should be given an OBE. We just missed it, but he is a total national treasure. He will remain, I suppose, in lots of people's hearts, but I suppose for me, that he will remain a big part of my family, in fact, and my wee girl and my man just absolutely loved him, and I did too. But I suppose when you work so closely with somebody on screen, that they become part of your family. So just to sum him up, it's just there are no words for the magnitude of him as a person and his greatness. He was everything. He was everything that you would ever want to work with. Everything in a friend, and in a person to be around. He was everything. A national treasure and everything.
Gail Telfer Stevens, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today about Andy. I want to just say to everybody who's been watching for the last, well, we've ran over a bit with time, but for almost 2 hours we've been talking about Andy Gray. And so thanks for staying with us. I want to thank all my guests, and let's leave the last word to Andy Gray. Good night.
Naked Radio was all the stuff that because it was quite topical, it changed, and it was weekly, so it was great. So we had loads of targets, and we had lawyers as well, because we were doing stuff. So the BBC Scotland lawyers were in, because it was recorded on a Thursday, Before it went out on Saturday, they had to double check it all. But I mean, one of my favourite gags in it was Sean Connery, why do you love Scotland? And I love Scotland because of its natural resilience, its beauty as a nation, but mainly I love Scotland because I live in Barbados. My favourite gag.